Well, we're going to spend a little bit of time in three different passages of Scripture this evening. One of them, of course, is the passage that we read together, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, but we're also going to look into Matthew's Gospel, and in fact that's where we're going to start, in Matthew chapter 7, and then we're going to go to 1 Corinthians 2, but then we're going to come back to Matthew and look at Matthew chapter 2. So there are those three passages, and what are we going to see as we look into these passages? What we're going to see is faith in action, and we're going to see the difference that it makes. It's easy in life to make claims. It's easy for the Bible to make claims. But are there passages of Scripture that not only make those claims, but actually show them in action and show us the difference that they make? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at this evening as far as one particular strand of Bible teaching is concerned. But before we do that, I want you to just imagine this, that you wake up tomorrow morning and we discover this as we listen to the news or tune into the news or go online and so on, or perhaps just from people panicking around us, that all the money we have in the world is the little bit of cash that we have in the house. Overnight, the government, they've been working on this for a while, but what they've done is that they've actually emptied everybody's bank account. They've taken all the money that there is, and so they've got a few £billion, and you and I have got nothing. Why have they done that? Well, it's part of a massive reset of the nation's finances. They've actually realised that they really can't solve all the problems that there are. And so what they've decided is that they will take all the wealth that is available, they'll pass other laws, outlawing debt, all that kind of thing, so you don't owe anybody anything, but you haven't got anything either. And they will take this enormous sum of money that they've gathered together and they will distribute it in the population, but not to everybody. They're going to distribute it to a smaller number of people, so still a large part of the population, perhaps most of the population, are still going to have nothing, but there is a sizable chunk which is going to have a sort of equal proportion of all the rest. And we can all start again. And so that's what they're going to do. And don't despair, you might be on the good list. You know, you might be on the list of the people who are going to get quite a lot of money, in fact. You might not. So in that situation, what's the big question that would be on your mind? What would you be really wanting to do? You'd be wanting these lists to be published, and you'd be wanting to be able to look at them, and you'd be wanting to see if your name is on them. Are you going to have some of this money? And the big question is, which list is my name on? There are going to be two groups of people. And if your name is on the first one, well, your bank account is going to be boosted again, not only with the money that you had, but also a lot of other people's money as well. But if it's not, if you're on the other list, well, you're going to have nothing. Now, the Bible divides people into two groups, just like those lists would if they ever were published, if that was ever done. And every one of us should be just as concerned to know which list we're on. So what we're going to think about this evening is this. We're going to start our thinking with recognizing that this is what the Bible does. In the Bible there is a binary. You're probably like me, every time you make a purchase or get your car serviced or something, you a few days later you get one of these annoying surveys in your email box, and it ends up with the question, how old are you and what sex are you? And one of the options is non-binary. Well, there's no non-binary in the Bible. There's no binary anyway in the world, but there's certainly not in the Bible. In the Bible, it's very much a binary picture. We open the service reading Romans chapter 8 and verse 6. To be carnally minded is death. To be spiritually minded is life and peace. That's a binary, isn't it? It's a binary in terms of the type of person, carnally minded, spiritually minded. It's a binary in terms of the ultimate outcome of those two types of lives. And the Bible does affirm this. And so we're going to start in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7 is the end of what we normally know as the Sermon on the Mount. And so what Jesus does in Matthew chapter 7 at the end is he draws these strands of thought together that he's been expounding in this sermon, and he applies them to people's lives. And he just presents many situations where you can be one thing or the other thing. You can't be both, and you can't be in the middle. He actually introduces this in chapter 6 and verse 24, where he talks about two masters. But chapter 7, he really ramps this up. He says to us in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 13 that there are two gates. Enter by the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way which leads to life. And there are few who find it. So there are two gates, two ways or two paths, and two outcomes. Have you entered through the narrow gate? You know what it's like to squeeze through a narrow gate or a narrow gap. It's a challenge. It's difficult. It's not easy. If you're carrying a big rucksack or whatever on your back, you've probably got to take it off. And you've got to make yourself as thin as you can. Breathe out, make your tummy go in or whatever. Perhaps turn sideways to get through, because you don't need quite so much room to go through sideways as you do to go through forwards. And this is all a picture, you see, of what it means to give yourself to Christ. It's like entering through a narrow gate. You can't take everything with you. You've got to leave some things behind when you come to Christ. It may be a struggle. It may be as if you're hearing some sort of, or feeling some kind of impulse to give yourself to Christ, and then you're feeling some other kind of impulse. Don't do that. It may be that you think, well, I will do it, but not yet. Have you entered through the narrow gate? Have you really come to Christ, given yourself to Christ, and been prepared to leave things behind? Have you been prepared to make that struggle to get through that gate? And are you walking on the narrow path? Are you concerned about God's will and what God wants with your life? Or do you feel you're free to do whatever you want to do? Because if you do, you haven't struggled through that narrow gate and you're not on that narrow path. Do you ever sometimes say to yourself, is it really worth it being a Christian? But can't I have an easier life? Can't I have less demands made on me and live freely and just please myself? This way is uncomfortable and hard and demanding, and I want to put my feet up. Then if we look down the chapter to verse 17, we see that there are two types of tree. Jesus says that every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Fruit is really a picture, isn't it? There's a process that goes on in a tree for the tree to bud and then begin to produce fruit, perhaps blossom first of all and then begin to produce fruit. It doesn't just appear suddenly as if by magic. It's not magic at all. There's a whole process that's gone on. But again, we've got two. Good trees, bad trees. So we've got two gates, two paths, two trees, good trees, bad trees. Then in verse 21, we read the same thing again. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Jesus is talking about the day on which he returns, and we all have to stand before him in judgment. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Cast out demons in your name? And done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So there are two types of people who will call Jesus Lord, and he will have two different answers. And then last of all, at the end of this chapter, from verse 24 onwards, we've got this picture of two builders. One who digs down for a good foundation and builds something solid and lasting and something that will withstand the buffeting and the storms of life. And one who can't be bothered with all that, but just gets on and starts building on the ground. And of course, when the storms come, the ground moves and the house comes crashing down. Now, always there's two. So Jesus calls the person who builds on a good foundation a wise builder. And the person who doesn't do that, a foolish builder. But again, we've got this two. You see, I'm just trying to show you from this passage that I'm not making it up when I say the Bible teaches that there are two groups, two lists, if you like. And you should be as concerned or even more concerned to know which list your name is on than you should be in the situation that I outlined first of all to do with money. This is not to do with money, it's to do with forever. And the other thing you notice is, in these two lists, that it isn't just the end which is in view. It's the whole of life. It's the gate. It's the path that takes you either to heaven or to hell. It's the bearing of good fruit, which is the result of a good process and being a good tree. And you mustn't think to yourself, don't think this. Well, I can sort of put this off. You know, it's like what I'm doing now doesn't matter. And I can come to Christ any time I like. You know, that's our wicked heart will tell us that. I remember when I was a teenager being witnessed to very earnestly by a man who told me that he became a Christian when he was 25, and I was about 16 or 17. And I'd learned enough about the gospel and I was convinced of the truth of it. And I really did feel one day, I am going to become a Christian. Oh, but good, I can put it off till I'm 25. That's what he did. No. Your life now is important. It is spiritually significant. The processes are going on in your life now that determine the kind of fruit you will bear. You're either a wise or a foolish builder now. The house might not be finished, but it's acquiring a character now. And so you mustn't think, well, you know, this is for other people, this is for older people, or something like that. It's not. The whole of life plays a part in eternity and in shaping our destiny. And what you are doing now, the attitude with which you go through the day now, is important. This isn't a sort of a compartmentalization, you know, where there are kind of spiritual issues, you put them on one side. No, this is the whole of life. Now let's look over at 1 Corinthians chapter 2, where we read together. And I just want us to notice the same thing. We don't need to spend so long thinking about the details for this. But here again, we've got the binary, haven't we? Paul says that when he went to Corinth, that city of Corinth, and we read about it in the book of Acts, he actually was scared. You know, we don't think of Paul being scared, but he was scared when he was in the city of Corinth. It was such a godless city. And they would be so opposed to what he had to say. God had to come to him in a special personal way and strengthen him and encourage him to keep going. And so he says that I was with you, he says in verse 3, in weakness, in fear, and in much trembling. So he would wake up in the morning, think, I've got to speak to people about Christ today, and he would actually shake because he was so afraid of how his message would be received. What did he do? Well, he said, my speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. So here we've got one side of the binary again, human wisdom. And then as he goes on to write in these verses, he talks about another kind of wisdom. He says, however, we speak wisdom among those who are mature, yet not the wisdom of this age, nor of the rulers of this age, who are coming to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the ages for our glory. That's what a mystery is. A mystery in the New Testament is not a mystery in the sense we speak about something being a mystery and we mean we don't understand it. But in the New Testament and the world of the New Testament, there were secrets which had been hidden, but now the box was open and they were understood. And so Paul says this is how what we preach has been. It's been hidden. But it's not hidden now. But it is hidden from some people. Again, we've got two kinds of people. God ordained this wisdom before he even created anything. He ordained it before the ages for our glory. So the gospel was there in God's plan originally. But none of the rulers of this age knew it. Isn't that amazing? The rulers are the clever people, aren't they? But they didn't know this. If they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. I don't know what they would have done to stop it, but certainly the Jewish rulers, if they had known who Jesus was, they would not have crucified him. But you see, although it was true that eye had not seen, nor ear heard, nor had entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him, but God has revealed them to us through his Spirit. So here we are. Here's the second group. People who've had a revelation. The gospel has been revealed. You know, what is it like when you become a Christian? Well, quite often when you become a Christian, it's not the first time you hear the gospel. If I think of myself, although I wasn't brought up in a Christian home, and I didn't hear the gospel from my parents, I had been hearing the gospel before I became a Christian for 2 or 3 years. And I think I heard it first of all from people who ran a youth club that I went to, a church youth club. Don't know what I was doing there. If you'd have said to me, do you want to go to a church youth club? I would have said, forget that. That's the last place I want to go. But somehow I ended up there. And they started to speak the gospel. And I got to the point where I understood the gospel. But I wasn't a Christian. See, just understanding the gospel doesn't make you a Christian. And then this sort of battle went on in my life. Jesus is claiming your life, I'm being told. Well, he can't have it. It's mine. I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm going to live it for myself. I've got a lot of things I want to do yet. Most of them bad things, and so he won't want to know about that, but I want to do them. So you see, you can have a kind of understanding of the gospel, but it isn't affecting your life. And I'm not going to give myself to Jesus. I'm not going to do that. And I remember an occasion when a friend of mine said to me, you know, these Christians, they're kind of weird, aren't they, really? But they seem to have something. And I remember I said to him, yeah, but they're just kidding themselves, aren't they? Why? Because I actually agreed with him. They did seem to have something that I didn't see in other people, but I didn't want to admit it. So there's a battle going on. And this is what Paul is talking about here. That there's a wisdom of the world. I can solve my problems. I can make lots of money. I can be a successful person and all that kind of thing. I don't need these kind of holy rollers, you know, to tell me anything. It's the wisdom of the world. It's the wisdom of the lost. And so the rulers of this world, they're no better. They don't know anything more about Christ just because they're the rulers of this world. They might be achievers, and we might have good reason to look up to them in certain areas. But, you know, I wouldn't go knocking on the door of 10 Downing Street if you want someone to tell you how to be saved. Because certainly the man who lives there couldn't tell you. But he's a ruler of this world. Great achiever. He's a multimillionaire, apparently. He rubs shoulders with Donald Trump and President Macron and all these people. But he cannot tell you how to get to heaven because he doesn't know himself. And so again, we've got this binary, you see. This binary between those who are saved and those who are not. And what do we know about those who are saved? Well, God has revealed these things, these hidden things, to us through his Spirit. It is the role of the Holy Spirit to open our eyes. It is his role to take the things of God to apply them to us. It's his role to open our eyes to see ourselves and what we truly are, and to convict of sin and righteousness and judgment. It's his role to open our eyes that we might say, that's who I need. I need Jesus Christ to die in my place for my sins, to take my punishment. And this is what Paul is writing about here in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Again, the binary. We have received, verse 12, not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God. So again, here we are, the spirit of the world, the Spirit who is from God, the binary. That we might know the things that have been freely given to us by God. These things we also speak, not in words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Holy Spirit teaches, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. But he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is judged of no one. So, I hope I've shown you enough of the New Testament to show you very clearly that the Bible does teach this, that there are two kinds of people, those who know God and those who don't. That they're the same kind of people in the sense they're all people, but there are two categories, if you like, of people. Now, can we see this worked out anywhere? And I want to take you back again to Matthew's Gospel, and this time to Matthew chapter 2. And I think we see this worked out really quite clearly. So Matthew chapter 2 is the passage in Matthew's Gospel where we are told about the wise men. You know, the three kings they're sometimes called, aren't they? But here in Matthew's Gospel, he calls them wise men. They came from somewhere east of the nation of Israel, probably from the area around Babylon. That's probably where they came from. And they were guided as they came by a star. This star had appeared, and they knew that it was a sign from God that they had to follow. And so they just followed it. They did whatever, saddled their horses or something, or their camels or whatever, and set out following the star. Where's it going? Don't know. We don't know. We know where it is now. We'll follow it. We'll just follow it. So that was what they did. They weren't Jewish people, but they probably there was probably some influence in Babylon from the Jewish people who'd been exiled there a few hundred years before. And there probably was still a Jewish community, and there was still probably a belief in a Messiah. And these people believed that, although they weren't Jews. And they came from the east, and they came guided by the star to the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. And they knew what they were looking for. Somehow they knew that this star was not just guiding them, but its appearance was a revelation to them that God had sent this Messiah that he had promised. But when they got to Jerusalem, they didn't know how they were going to find him. And they obviously were quite powerful people, because they could go and knock on the door of 10 Downing Street and have it opened to them. They went and knocked on Herod's palace. Herod was the king, and he had them in. And they explained to him what they were doing there and why they had come all this long way. And they wanted to know where the person was who had been born. Herod didn't know. Herod wasn't a Jew. Although he was the king of the Jews, he actually wasn't a Jew. He was from Idumea. He was further, these pictures of Petra, this city that's carved in the rock. That's where his people came from. And so basically he said, well, I don't know. Let's get in the people who do know. So they got in the priests and the scribes who knew, and they put the question to them. We read it there in chapter 2, Matthew chapter 2. Verse 4, when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So he didn't know anything about this. Perhaps he'd never heard of the Christ before. We don't know, but he said, well, you tell me about this then. These are your scriptures. And they did know. They said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. For thus it is written in the prophet, but you, Bethlehem in the land of Judah, this is from the Old Testament book of Micah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So they knew. Now Herod knew, because they told him. And so we read in verse 7, Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. So they'd obviously been going for some time. And then he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go, and when you have seen the child, come back and tell me, because I would like to go and worship him. Now, here we've got the two groups of people. We've got Herod, a ruler of this world. We've got the priests and the scribes and the people who knew the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament scriptures, what they just called the scriptures. They didn't, because there wasn't a New Testament then. And they had the knowledge. And then we've got the wise men who had the question. And what do we see? We see that the knowledge was useless to them. It might mean they could answer the question, and you might be able to answer lots of questions because you've been trained, in the Bible and so on. But they didn't say, it's in Bethlehem, let's go. It was just a piece of academic sort of information to them. They should have been amazed at the possibility that the Messiah had been born. But they could just answer the questions. That's all they could do. And Herod said Well, come and tell me where he is so that I can go and worship him. But he had not the slightest intention of worshipping him. He made careful inquiry of them. When did you see this star? How long have you been following the star? How long has it taken you to get here? And they told him. And what did he do with that knowledge? Well, what he did was send his soldiers into Bethlehem after he realized that they weren't going to come back and tell him. He sent his soldiers into Bethlehem to kill all the boys 2 years old and under. This is the sort of time scale that we're operating on, between when they first saw the star and between the time by which he would have expected them to come back to him, and probably a little bit more, probably a margin for error, gave him 2 years. So they could answer all the questions, but they couldn't do a single thing with it. But the wise men, you notice, the wise men took that same knowledge and they used it to find their way to Jesus. Jesus was no longer a baby in a stable. I know in our nativities quite often, we have pictures, we have a sort of model of a manger and a baby and the sheep and the cows and the asses and the shepherds, because they did go to the manger. And quite often we have the wise men there as well, don't we? Well, the wise men never went to the manger. They were no longer in the stable. They departed. The star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother. So this isn't the night on which Jesus was born. This is a little bit after. And Joseph and Mary had moved on from the stable and found a house to live in Bethlehem. And that's where they were. But Jesus was still a baby, so it wasn't, it wasn't years later. It was only weeks or months later. But that's what happened. So they came, and then when they saw him, they fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That's the other thing. There may not have been 3 of them. We often think so, because there were 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And we think one brought gold, one brought frankincense, one brought myrrh. That may not have been the case. There may not have been 3. There was obviously at least 2, but there might have been more than 3. And they might each have brought some gold and some frankincense and some myrrh. So it's not certain that there were 3 of them, but certainly there were these people, and they worshipped him. They saw the young child with Mary, his mother. They fell down and worshipped him. Now, they've given a promise, haven't they, to Herod? Yes, when we know where he is, we'll come and tell you. Then they were divinely warned, we read in a dream, that they should not return to Herod. And they departed for their own country another way. They avoided him. So here's the 2 groups of people again. Those who even knew the Bible, but it didn't motivate them to worship. They had the knowledge. They could say within a sort of fairly short margin where Jesus was. He's in Bethlehem. We can't tell you the house, the street, and everything else, but he's there. And then they all went off. But the wise men followed the star, continued following the star, and they went to worship. So they came to Jesus. They were brought to Jesus by God, who was controlling this star, who sent this star and was controlling the star. And when they had done what they came to do, to worship and present their gifts, then God came to them again in a dream and said, don't go back to Herod. Go back another way. We want to keep this child safe. So you see, what you see here is the working out of the two groups of people. People who had worldly wisdom, even quite a lot of it actually, biblical knowledge as well. But God wasn't working in their hearts. They weren't stirred up by it to go and seek Christ. But the wise men showed God's Spirit at work in their lives. And so you see what Jesus talks about, the narrow gate, the difficult path, the two kinds of trees, the two kinds of builders. These are realities. And when it comes down to important issues and times in life, the reality comes out. It's not hidden. The wise men came to Christ. The wise men worshipped Christ. The wise men went back rejoicing because God had worked in their hearts and revealed truth to them by his Spirit. So we're not talking about, when the Bible talks about there being two, this binary, those who know God and those who don't know God, we're not talking about, it's not just a kind of airy theory that we don't see it making any difference to life. It made a real difference in this particular case, and it does make a difference to life. Don't you want God to make a difference to your life? If you want God to make a difference to your life, take notice of what Jesus says. Enter by the narrow gate. Give yourself to Christ. Leave things behind if you have to do that, because the gate's narrow. Bear good fruit. Build a building that can withstand the storms in your life by following what Jesus says in his word. It does make a difference. It made a difference on this occasion, and it does make a difference in life. Now we're going to sing our last